This is a CBS News special report.
Dan Rather reporting for CBS News from New York. The Reverend Martin Luther King Jr. was shot to death by an assassin late today as he stood on a balcony in Memphis, Tennessee. Dr. King had planned to lead another civil rights march in Memphis next Monday. We got the latest on the story now from Russ Hodge, news director of WREC-TV in Memphis.
Memphis is a confused and shocked city tonight. No one can believe what has happened. It's been just a little over an hour since Dr. Martin Luther King died from an assassin's bullet. For the first half hour, police were busy trying to track down the young white man who it is believed fired the fatal shot. However, the picture has changed. There have been scattered instances of looting in the predominantly Negro sections of the city, most of it in liquor stores. Crowds have been gathering on street corners, and police are trying to break them up. The National Guard units from West Tennessee have been called back in after being released just a day ago. Mayor Henry Loeb has declared a complete curfew in the city, and this has been backed up by Shelby County Sheriff William Morris. King was shot as he stood on the balcony in front of room 306 in the Lorraine Hotel. He was alone. His aides were in the room behind him. Dr. King was rushed to St. Joseph's Hospital emergency room. He died at 7 o'clock Central Standard Time from a gunshot wound in the neck. Police recovered what is believed to be the murder weapon, a Browning rifle with a scope sight. Reverend Andrew Young, King's top lieutenant, was at the hospital awaiting word and described the shooting.
Well, we were at the Torch Motel, and we were getting ready to go to dinner at Reverend Kyle's house, and we were waiting for Dr. King to get ready. And as he came out of his room on the edge of the balcony, he was shot. And we thought a firecracker had gone on. Most of us were downstairs on the lower level. And we immediately ran up and saw that he'd been pretty badly wounded and sent for the ambulance and the police and everybody.
Where was he shot, Andy?
He was shot.
We have just talked to two of the leaders in Memphis, Judge Ben Hooks, a criminal court judge, a Negro, and a Reverend. We have also talked to the Reverend James M. Lawson, who has been a leader in the sanitation strike here, and also a pastor of Centenary Methodist Church. They have asked for citizens of Memphis to remain calm, and we believe that their words will have some effect. This is Russ Hodge, WREC-TV in Memphis.
There was reaction from the highest levels. President Johnson went on the air and in a national broadcast said, and I quote, "America is shocked and saddened by the brutal slaying," end of quotation. In his brief message, Mr. Johnson also disclosed that because of Dr. King's death, the president has canceled plans for a political appearance tonight and has postponed until at least Friday his scheduled departure for Vietnam strategy talks in Honolulu. In Memphis, as Russ Hodge mentioned, an immediate curfew went into effect and police moved through the streets. To recap this special report, the Reverend Martin Luther King, Nobel Prize winner and one of the nation's civil rights leaders, was shot to death late today in Memphis, Tennessee. Dr. King was 39. Memphis police say 2 men have been arrested in connection with Dr. King's slaying. Dan Rather, CBS News, New York. This from CBS News has been a special report.
Direct from our newsroom in Washington, in color, this is the CBS Evening News with Walter Cronkite and Russ Hodge in Memphis, Tennessee, Dan Rather in New York, Bernard Kalb in Saigon, Marvin Kalb in Wellington, New Zealand, and Bert Quint in Quezon, South Vietnam.
Good evening. Dr. Martin Luther King, the apostle of nonviolence in the civil rights movement, has been shot to death in Memphis, Tennessee. Police have issued an all-points bulletin for a well-dressed young white man seen running from the scene. Officers also reportedly chased and fired on a radio-equipped car containing 2 white men. Dr. King was standing on the balcony of a second-floor hotel room tonight when, according to a companion, a shot was fired from across the street. In the friend's words, the bullet exploded in his face. Police, who have been keeping a close watch over the Nobel Peace Prize winner because of Memphis' turbulent racial situation, were on the scene almost immediately. They rushed the 39-year-old Negro leader to a hospital where he died of a bullet wound in the neck. Police said they found a high-powered hunting rifle about a block from the hotel. but it was not immediately identified as the murder weapon. Mayor Henry Loeb has reinstated the dusk-to-dawn curfew he imposed on the city last week when a march led by Dr. King erupted in violence. Governor Buford Ellington has called out 4,000 National Guardsmen, and police report that the murder has touched off sporadic acts of violence in a Negro section of the city. In a nationwide television address, President Johnson expressed the nation's shock.
America is shocked and saddened by the brutal slaying tonight of Dr. Martin Luther King. I ask every citizen to reject the blind violence that has struck Dr. King, who lived by nonviolence. I pray that his family can find comfort in the memory of all he tried to do for the land he loved so well. I have just conveyed the sympathy of Ms. Johnson, myself, to his widow, Mrs. King. I know that every American of goodwill joins me in mourning the death of this outstanding leader and in praying for peace and understanding throughout this land. We can achieve nothing by lawlessness and divisiveness among the American people. It's only by joining together and only by working together can we continue to move toward equality and fulfillment for all of our people. I hope that all Americans tonight will search their hearts as they ponder this most tragic incident. I have canceled my plans for the evening. I am postponing my trip to Hawaii until tomorrow.
Dr. King had returned to Memphis only yesterday, determined to prove that he could lead a peaceful mass march in support of striking sanitation workers, most of whom are Negroes. At a federal court hearing today, the city tried to make permanent an injunction against the march. Police Director Frank Holloman testified that he had inside information that the Ku Klux Klan planned a countermarch. In his words, "I fear for the safety of the citizens of Memphis. It could be worse than Watts or worse than Detroit." Attorneys for Dr. King countered with a 9-point plan which they contended would prevent more rioting. During the violence which took over Dr. King's march in Memphis just 1 week ago, 1 young Negro was killed, 62 persons were injured, and 276 arrested. Dr. King himself, when it began, was surrounded by a protecting human wall of followers, put into a car, and quickly taken from the scene. Dr. King had this to say last night about the situation in Memphis.
If I lived in China or even Russia or any totalitarian country, maybe I could understand some of these illegal injunctions. Maybe I could understand the denial of certain basic First Amendment privileges because they haven't committed themselves to that over there. But somewhere I read of the freedom of assembly. Somewhere I read of the freedom of speech. Somewhere I read of the freedom of press. Somewhere I read that the greatness of America is the right to protest for right. And so just as I say we aren't going to let any dogs or water hoses turn us around, we aren't going to let any injunction turn us around.
There was shock in Harlem tonight when word of Dr. King's murder reached the nation's largest Negro community. Men, women, and children poured into the streets. They appeared dazed. Many were crying. A young Negro said, Dr. King didn't really have to go back to Memphis. Maybe he wanted to prove something. Well, maybe he did. Dr. King, the winner of the Nobel Peace Prize, a leading exponent of nonviolence, had often risked danger, and he often said he would be willing to die for his cause.
Only way we can really achieve freedom is to somehow conquer the fear of death. But if a man has not discovered something that he will die for, he isn't fit to live. Deep down in our nonviolent creed is the conviction that there are some things so dear, some things so precious, some things so eternally true that they're worth dying for. And if a man happens to be 36 years old, as I happen to be, and some great truth stands before the door of his life, some great opportunity to stand up for that which is right and that which is just, and he refuses to stand up because he wants to live a little longer, and he's afraid his home will get bombed, or he's afraid that he will lose his job, or he's afraid that he will get shot or beat down by state troopers. He may go on and live until he's 80, but he's just as dead as 36 as he would be at 80, and the cessation of breathing in his life is merely the belated announcement of an earlier death of the spirit. He died. A man dies when he refuses to stand up for that which is right. A man dies when he refuses to stand up for justice. A man dies when he refuses to take a stand for that which is true. So we're going to stand up right here amid horses. We're going to stand up right here in Alabama amid billy clubs. We're going to stand up right here in Alabama amid police dogs if they have them. We're going to stand up amid tear gas. We're going to stand up amid anything that they can muster up, letting the world know that we are determined to be free.
Dr. King won his first important civil rights victory in Alabama when he led the famed Montgomery bus boycott in 1956. His campaign led to integrated seating on city buses in the deep South City, and that, possibly more than any other feat, added new fuel to the surging civil rights movement in the 1950s and beyond. CBS News will present a special program on Dr. King at 11 o'clock Eastern Time tonight over many of these stations. And now for an on-the-scene story of what happened in Memphis tonight, here is Russ Hodge, the news director of WREC-TV.
Memphis is a confused and shocked city tonight. No one can believe what has happened. It's been just a little over an hour since Dr. Martin Luther King died from an assassin's bullet. For the first half hour, police were busy trying to track down the young white man who it is believed fired the fatal shot. However, the picture has changed. There have been scattered instances of looting in the predominantly Negro sections of the city, most of it in liquor stores. Crowds have been gathering on street corners, and police are trying to break them up. The National Guard units from West Tennessee have been called back in after being released just a day ago. Mayor Henry Loeb has declared a complete curfew in the city, and this has been backed up by Shelby County Sheriff William Morris. King was shot as he stood on the balcony in front of room 306 in the Lorraine Hotel. He was alone. His aides were in the room behind him. Dr. King was rushed to St. Joseph's Hospital emergency room. He died at 7 o'clock Central Standard Time from a gunshot wound in the neck. Police recovered what is believed to be the murder weapon, a Browning rifle with a scope sight. Reverend Andrew Young, King's top lieutenant, was at the hospital awaiting word and described the shooting.
Well, we were at the Torch Motel, and we were getting ready to go to dinner at Reverend Kyle's house, and we were waiting for Dr. King to get ready. And as he came out of his room on the edge of the balcony, he was shot. And we thought a firecracker had gone on. Most of us were downstairs on the lower level. And we immediately ran up and saw that he'd been pretty badly wounded and sent for the ambulance and the police and everybody.
Where was he shot at?
He was shot.
We have just talked to two of the leaders in Memphis, Judge Ben Hooks, a criminal court judge, a Negro, and a Reverend. We've also talked to the Reverend James M. Lawson, who has been a leader in the sanitation strike here, and also a pastor of Centenary Methodist Church. They have asked for citizens of Memphis to remain calm, and we believe that their words will have some effect. This is Russ Hodge, WREC-TV in Memphis.
The other news of the day in a moment.
This is another fine mess you got us into.
What do you think got those Indians so upset?
Who wouldn't be upset? Telling all those poor Indians that all the gold they found was non-returnable. Quartz.
How do you like this fiendish plan? Putting those cold Budweisers so close. Hey, I can read the label on this one. Listen to this. This is the famous Budweiser beer. We know of no brand produced by any other brewer which costs so much to brew and age. Our exclusive Beechwood aging produces a taste, a smoothness, a drinkability that you'll find in no other beer at any price.
If we ever get out of this, why don't you become a radio announcer? I sure wish the cavalry would arrive.
Oh, what makes you think the cavalry's gonna come and rescue us?
Rescuing us is purely accidental. Today is payday at the fort. And yonder lies Custer's last stand.
Budweiser, best reason in the world to drink beer.
Hanoi has charged that American planes today attacked the populated northwest corner of North Vietnam, an area far above the 20th parallel bomb line set by President Johnson. Communist broadcast said the planes dropped more than 50 bombs on Lai Chau province, just 30 miles south of Red China's border. U.S. officials said they had no knowledge of such an attack, but they ordered an investigation. The supposed target area is only 10 miles from the poorly defined Laotian border, and some military sources raised the possibility that the planes were American-built aircraft piloted by Laotians who strayed off course. North Vietnam so far does not appear to be making a major incident out of this alleged raid, and U.S. spokesman expressed confidence that it would not affect the efforts to arrange preliminary talks between Washington and Hanoi. President Johnson spent much of the day in New York City. His announced purpose was to attend formal installation ceremonies for the new Archbishop of New York, Terence J. Cook, at St. Patrick's Cathedral. We got the story from CBS News White House correspondent Dan Rather.
The president's entrance into the cathedral was greeted by applause, unusual at such church services. In a modernized and shortened version of the ancient ceremony, Archbishop Cook received the shepherd's crook, symbolic of his new office. In his address, the Archbishop praised the president's new peace initiative in Vietnam and prayed for its success.
Let us pray with all our hearts that God will inspire our president, who has so greatly honored us by being here this afternoon. In the last few days, we have all admired his heroic efforts in the hopeful search for peace in Vietnam. We ask God to bless his efforts with success.
The president's daughter, Lucy, a Catholic, was with him today. Mrs. John F. Kennedy was also there. But after the final blessing by Archbishop Cook and the end of the 2-hour ceremony, it was UN Ambassador Arthur Goldberg who held the president's attention as they walked out of the cathedral together. Goldberg wanted the president to visit the UN. Mr. Johnson wasn't sure he should go. Only after reboarding his helicopter in Central Park did the president change his mind. The presidential motorcade cranked up again. Mr. Johnson doubled back across town from Central Park and met UN Secretary General U Thant. The substance of their talks dealt not with Vietnam armistice prospects, but with Mr. Johnson's program for economic development of all Southeast Asia, including North Vietnam. Following a half-hour session with U Thant, the president returned to Washington.
South Vietnam's government put out a statement today saying it welcomes the moves toward U.S.-North Vietnamese talks. In reality, however, the Saigon regime is concerned over possible negotiations, as we learned from CBS News correspondent Bernard Cow.
The North Vietnamese surprise declaration and the quick Johnson follow-up produced instant insomnia here. Lots of people remained awake during the night listening for more details on their radios, either from Hanoi or Washington. And while there has been an outbreak of jubilation mixed with caution that hopefully the diplomats might eventually get around to talking about peace, there was also the recognition that the moment of truth was approaching for Washington and Saigon, specifically whether the two allies will accept the same kind of compromise, whatever form it might take. South Vietnamese officials are concerned that domestic and political pressures on Washington may produce what's being described here as a sellout to the communists, And even President Johnson's reassurances that the United States will never accept a fake solution have not reassured everyone. Leaders of the South Vietnamese Senate and Assembly called a last-minute news conference this morning to reiterate the independence of South Vietnam, saying that they would never accept any imposed solution and that they still think that Hanoi's response was a gimmick and less than satisfactory. Earlier, U.S. Ambassador Ellsworth Bunker met with President Nguyen Van Thieu at Independence Palace. The American ambassador left the palace after an early morning session, presumably assigned the same mission, to reassure the Saigon regime that their objectives were the same, peace, but not at any price. And later in the morning, President Thieu called a meeting of his own at Independence Palace. He summoned the ambassadors of the contributing allies to hear his views on the latest developments. It's being said by informed sources here that the Saigon regime will probably be more hard-nosed than the United States in trying to find a settlement. But it's also being said that whatever differences do exist between the two allies are horizontal rather than vertical. In any case, the war has suddenly been upstaged by the excitement of the possibility of meaningful negotiations. Bernard Kalb, CBS News, Saigon.
In New Zealand, a meeting of the 7 allies fighting in Vietnam ended with a declaration that they will keep on fighting until Hanoi agrees to respect, quote, South Vietnam's democratic and constitutional rights. The allies also rejected the idea of any Saigon government coalition with the communists. That solid front statement came after the allied ministers recovered from the news of the latest Vietnam peace developments. CBS News diplomatic correspondent Marvin Kalb has that story in Wellington, New Zealand.
Experts have been made fools overnight. None really believe that the North Vietnamese would agree to preliminary talks. The new judgment among this embarrassed group is that the North Vietnamese are gambling on getting a better diplomatic deal from a lame duck president than they figure they would get from a hard, tough campaigning Lyndon Johnson. Within this context, the key factor that apparently unhinged Hanoi in this key decision was the president's decision not to run, announced last Sunday. Every one of America's allies was stunned by the news, some apparently more than others.
I know nothing very clear, so I cannot make any comment.
Do you think this is perhaps a step forward?
Frankly, as I know, I have no details about this press cable. I cannot comment on this news.
Did this kind of an idea that the North Vietnamese might agree to talk come as any kind of surprise to your delegation?
No, not at all. Not at all.
Do you yourself, Mr. Prime Minister, read this as a step forward towards the kind of negotiations that the Allies have been trying to get?
No, any kind of talks are better than no talks.
And this is, how would you describe this? These are preliminary talks that have been agreed to.
I said the position was unclear, but it appears at this moment that North Vietnam is maintaining the position which it has held for some time. However, they are prepared to talk, and this in itself is some progress.
The initial talks between Hanoi and Washington are expected to take place in secret, with Ambassadors Harriman and Thompson joining in only later. Moscow is expected to be the key site.
North Vietnam's Premier Pham Van Dong is quoted in a Paris newspaper interview as saying that Hanoi will be as serious in negotiations with the United States as, in his words, we are on the battlefield. But Dong also said there can be no real settlement unless the United States accepts the communist conditions for peace. Among those demands already rejected by Washington are withdrawal of all U.S. troops from Vietnam and recognition of the Viet Cong as the South Vietnamese people's only legitimate spokesman.
Just get me those figures.
Uh-oh. Here comes acid indigestion. Excess acid starts dripping into your stomach. You need new Triactin, the antacid with a special stomach-relaxing ingredient. Triactin not only neutralizes acid, Triactin's special ingredient goes further to help turn off the excess acid faucet. Excess acid's gone, indigestion's gone. New Triactin helps turn off the excess acid faucet, liquid and tablets.
In Vietnam, Allied relief forces were reported today to have advanced to within a half-mile of the Marine outpost at Khe Sanh. At bad weather, an enemy mortar fire slowed up the drive at that point. At Khe Sanh itself, a Marine unit moved out and took control of a hill that had been held by the North Vietnamese. The Allies have yet to make major contact with the enemy, which was thought to have had up to 16,000 troops surrounding Khe Sanh at one time. Associated Press quoted Soviet sources in London as saying the communists lifted their siege of the base as a goodwill gesture connected with the expected preliminary talks between Hanoi and Washington. But American field commanders argue that U.S. airstrikes forced the communists to pull back from Khe Sanh. As the drive moved on toward Khe Sanh, CBS News correspondent Bert Quint was at the Marine post and filed this report.
Many of Khe Sanh's defenders have an idea that help is on the way. But there's no feeling of jubilation here, not yet at least. Nor is there any fear about what could happen between now and the time that help finally does arrive. Right now, there is an unaccustomed air of ease about this long-besieged outpost. Things have been relatively quiet for the last few days. Enemy rockets, mortars, and artillery, as well as sniper fire, still come in from the hills surrounding Khe Sanh, but there hasn't been as much of it. The men have been able to work on improving their trench living quarters, to relax a little, throwing a football around in the ruins of mortared buildings.
See? Simple as that. Look out for the 100.
Betting extraordinary sums that nobody intends to pay on the toss of a knife. Even on the perimeter, where South Vietnamese troops man the trenches between the Americans and the North Vietnamese, there is only sporadic firing during the day. At night, though, as it so often does, it gets worse. Whether they will be relieved or just reinforced here is not yet clear. But Marine Colonel David Long, Khe Sanh's commanding officer, is nonchalant about it all. What is it going to mean to you specifically, having that road open strategically? What will this do?
Well, I don't know specifically that it's going to make a lot of difference to me. Fortunately, the people above me and all of the Armed Forces of the United States have seen fit to keep me well supplied. Now, the manner in which they did it, as you well know, was by aircraft, since that road was not open. Now, it may make it easier on the people in the rear. I don't know that it... I've got what I need. Now, what it's doing to the people back there, I don't know. You'd have to talk to them.
Hi, Pat.
Hello.
How about a cup of coffee before the faculty meeting?
Oh, Jim, I have some papers to mark. I'll see you there.
Hey, Jeff. What's with Pat? I don't know. I dated her once. Couldn't make the grade. I don't follow. The way she acts, you think I had bad bread.
Come on, Teach. You got some learning to do. Try Listerine.
Ah, mouthwash is too sweet. Sweet as soda pop.
Not Listerine antiseptic. It has a clean, fresh taste. Besides, Listerine kills germs.
Germs?
Germs can cause bad breath.
Yeah, but a date can last for hours.
That's just it. Listerine keeps breath fresh for hours.
Okay, Coach. I'll try it.
94.
Hey, Jim. Hey. A special teachers meeting?
Very special. You did it, Coach. Me? Well, maybe Listerine.
Listerine antiseptic kills germs, keeps breath fresh for hours.
Vice President Humphrey hinted today that he will become a presidential candidate, but at the same time indicated he probably won't declare this until after President Johnson returns from Hawaii, probably early next week. Delegates at a labor convention in Pittsburgh shouted, "Tell us what we want to hear, Hubert." But Humphrey replied that our decision will come in due time. The House today passed a weakened version of President Johnson's travel tax bill to reduce the dollar drain. The measure, which goes to the Senate, would impose a 5% tax on overseas airline fares. It also would cut the $100 duty-free exemption on foreign goods to $10. The second unmanned test of America's giant Saturn V ran into a series of problems today, which raised doubts about whether it is ready for astronauts to ride. The 36-story rocket and its Apollo spaceship lifted off from Cape Kennedy exactly on time at 7 a.m., but the failure of two of the Saturn's 5 second-stage engines put the big ship into the wrong orbit. And later, a third-stage rocket engine designed to start the spacecraft toward the moon failed to ignite for a test. Even though the Apollo landed safely near its Pacific target zone, the troubles threatened to delay the Man on the Moon program. It was nothing like yesterday, but the encouraging Vietnam news again pushed prices higher on the New York Stock Exchange. The volume was heavy, with more than 14,300,000 shares traded. The exchange index gained 22 cents. The murder of Dr. Martin Luther King has triggered violence tonight in Memphis's Negro section, and there are reports of trouble also in some other cities. Memphis police said snipers have fired on police and National Guardsmen and that some persons have been hit. Fire bombings and vandalism also were reported. Birmingham, Alabama police also reported some disorders in a Negro section there, and Miami police were pelted by rocks when they answered a report that a furniture store was being looted. That in Miami. And that's the way it is, Thursday, April 4th, 1968. This is Walter Cronkite, CBS News, reporting from Washington. Good night.
We never expected twins. My wife was frantic at first. I tried to help, like doing the marketing. That isn't the instant I buy, she said. Try it, I said. It's instant Maxwell House coffee. Good to the last drop. The instant that tastes like coffee. You be a good little Maxwell housewife and relax a little, and this marriage might even survive twins.
Maxwell House Coffee, instant and ground.
Almost nothing has been done about tonight's dessert. Because Jell-O has invented a way to make a great cream pie by doing almost nothing. It has a crumb crust you don't bake.
No baking.
A filling you don't cook.
No cooking.
A topping you pile high.
That makes it.
A great cream pie by doing almost nothing. New Jell-O cream pie.
Great.
Direct from our newsroom in Washington, in color, this has been the CBS Evening News with Walter Cronkite.